So, what happens when the government becomes too intrusive and too controlling and begins to make decisions for you? Well, if the past 2 years hasn't shown you that that is possible in this country, and if you don't have a decision made up in your mind yet, then I don't really know what to tell you. But I will tell you this: there is someone who I am going to have on this show in just a moment who has the answer for what we all should be doing in order to secure our constitutional rights from an overreaching government. Jennifer Romes, she is a Navy warfare scientist. She's been working for the U.S. Navy as a civilian worker for the past about 14 years, and I'm extremely excited to have her on the program. And so, without further ado, she's going to tell you her story about how she's been standing up to who? The U.S. Navy, the American federal government. All right, Jennifer, thank you for being on the show. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I am feeling well, so I assume I don't have the virus or any other disease as of right now. So yeah, we're good. You had some bad weather here recently,
And we did. And we're getting more.
and you're out in Virginia, right?
Yes. Fredericksburg.
Good old Fredericksburg. Yeah, because I remember you were telling me that the power was out in the area. It reminded me a little bit of what we went through here in Texas beginning of last year with the big freeze that swept through here. People had their power out for days. Luckily, I only had to deal with it for about 12 hours, and I had my fireplace going. So thank God for the fireplace. So I lived.
It's amazing. It did make me think that I am a lot more durable than I really originally thought, but I enjoy my electricity, so I'd like them to keep it on.
Amen to that. Yeah, exactly. Now, so you and I got connected here a couple of months back. I think it was October. Um, no, it wasn't October. It was a couple of months back, maybe November, December. And I had written an article called "The End of American Courage" for the Epic Times, and you reached out to me in an email, and it sort of really your situation addresses my concerns that I had written in that article about the end of American courage, the ability to stand up and say, uh, no, you can only go so far, whether it's an individual, whether it's the government, and in your case, it is the government. What is the situation that you're dealing with right now?
So it all started. Well, I mean, I think we all knew mandates were going to come along at some point, but we didn't, of course, know how quickly. So in October, about mid-October, the vice admiral that's over NAVC, which is the area of the Navy that I work for, he sent out an all hands email. These are fairly common things for any number of reasons that he would send them out, but this one in particular happened to talk about the executive order from the president and how they were going to be moving to a navy that was, the requirement was going to be for vaccines, which I can tell you when I signed up to join, that was not part of my employment. It was never a condition of my employment. Nothing to do with my medical history of any kind had to do with my employment. So, but the big thing was that he said, frankly, if you aren't vaccinated, you won't be working for the US Navy. And I'm thinking to myself, the minute that email came out, I'm like, this cannot be right. How can this, there is no way this admiral can say this to, his civilian workforce. Um, all sorts of alarms went off, and I'm sure it did for other people too. I mean, I know of others, but at that moment, I mean, I reached out to anyone and everyone I could think of. But it was Stu Peters that gave me, he interviewed me like I don't know, it was a couple of days, after that. But and then this email has been everywhere now. So, but this guy though, he never apologized, never came back and retracted anything, and just left it as it is. Also because of that. And of course, mentioning that or getting that out into the public only just puts you right in the middle of this guy's crosshairs. Not that he cares, because I don't think he does. He's an admiral. He really doesn't care whether I agree with him or not. But the problem is, he hasn't left himself or the Navy in a really good position, and the Navy's been the worst of it. The Navy's been worse than the Army and the Marines and the Air Force with regard to the mandates. I don't know why. I don't know if it's just, I think the Navy is also really more political now than, I mean, I guess they always have been, but it just seems they're even more so in the upper echelons of our leadership. So that has made it bad. But now, even worse, they're instituting decisions that target people who are unvaccinated versus vaccinated. So I run the lab that I'm part of. So I have a team of people that work for me. All of them are vaccinated. I am the only unvaccinated one. And they are all allowed to travel for work, even though they have been sick. Every one of them has been sick. Some have tested positive for COVID and had to go home. But they can travel for work. They can go to certain buildings. I am not allowed to go to certain buildings. I'm not allowed to travel for work in my official capacity, because they've decided this is whatever their policy is going to be. And so I did file a religious exemption. I think some of the firings you hear about are people who chose to do nothing. They didn't file an exemption. They didn't attest to their status. And I am 100% on board with that. I don't think they should have been fired for that. But I do have a particular, I use the religious exemption as my platform. So I chose to file one, but they haven't done anything with those. They're just sitting in limbo. So none of us know from day to day what's going to happen to us. Do we have a job? Do we not have? I mean, we have a job right now, but will we have one tomorrow? What happens if the courts don't come through? What does that do for us? So, um, I mean, there are numerous lawsuits that are going on out there, but nothing has happened as of yet. And I think most of it is because there hasn't been any adverse, action taken at this point in time. Like, we haven't been fired yet. So really, what's the judge going to do? Unless someone, reverses the mandate and says, hey, Biden, you can't do that. So, but that's where the Navy is right now. I'm sure it's true for the other branches as well.
Yeah, and so you're a Navy warfare scientist. So what is that? How long have you been working with the U.S. Navy? And you and I were discussing it before we started recording that you're like the only one who does this particular job in the nation.
Yes. So for I'm in the area of Navy surface electronic warfare, which is I mean, that's a big, broad category. But on surface ships, I support a system that it's on every U.S. Navy surface ship and Coast Guards as well. So, I mean, I can't go into a lot of details about it, but the whole purpose of electronic surveillance is to detect, identify, and counter anti-ship cruise missiles. So the portion that I take care of is the identification part. So my job is, when the signal is detected by the system, that how we program our sensor is going to correctly classify it so they can launch the appropriate countermeasures. So that's the piece that I do. It's there aren't there there is me, and there are people on my team. I mean, I do have a team that supports me, but not everybody on the team does. We don't all do the same things. So and it's been a problem. The reason why I brought up that it was just me that does it, um, backfilling positions in the Navy, we're very bad at it. You would talk about readiness, and they use this vaccine as readiness, yet we don't have people. There isn't anyone to come in behind me and do what I do. They don't encourage it. They're, I mean, you would think that would be part of sustainment, right? You would want to have more than one person that can do a job. um, and mine isn't the only one that's like that. There are others who are in the very same boat. If they were gone, there wouldn't be anyone to replace them either. Does that mean you wouldn't figure it out? No, eventually you would, but it is a weakness.
Yeah, I find that absolutely bizarre. I mean, every industry, every business has somebody that can replace somebody else just in case something happens, like sickness, not even death, just, being really sick, can't do the job. That is, and speaking of military readiness, this, the mandate in saying, that frankly you won't be working for the U.S. Navy. If you're the only person who does this particular job, the Navy can't afford to let you go. They can't afford to fire you. And that was part of the email I wanted to mention. Uh, it says every member of the NAVSEA team is important, and we cannot afford to lose a single member of this tremendous team. And yet, they are more than willing to eliminate whoever decides not to get the vaccine. And as you said, they haven't officially fired you, but you did the exemption. Other people didn't. They're gone. This is the opposite, from my perspective, of military readiness, especially given that there's been so many adverse reactions to the vaccine, the numerous vaccines that are out there, the Johnson and Johnson, the Moderna. There's all these various types that cause certain things, and even the government, the federal government or the FDA recently said, "Hey, on the Johnson and Johnson, yeah, don't take that because there's clotting." And we remember when we first heard about that, it was always, "Oh, this is a very rare case, extremely rare." And then all of a sudden, Johnson and Johnson starts creating this blood thinner for children, and it just seems like everything is adding up to what the hell's going on here. This is not military readiness. This is almost sabotage.
Hmm.
So, I mean, what is going on? Because, like you said, they can't afford to lose you, but this is the opposite of military readiness.
So I mean, really, aside from just thinking that all of these people are insane who are on board with this, which I don't think is the case, but I do think there is some amount of, how when you have to justify, there are people who have to justify everything they do, right? I mean, so they make a bad decision and they have to justify it. Well, I got the shot, so you should have to get the shot. Well, I did. It's kind of like hazing, and I think there's some amount of that that's going into this. There are plenty of people I know who have gotten these vaccines, and the only adverse reaction they had was, they were really sick for a day or whatever. And the great one is they'll be like, "No, no, I was told that means my body is producing a good immune response." I'm like, "No, I don't think that's what that is. If you're really sick after taking something, that generally means it's not good for you." But you cannot convince people when their doctors and all these people that they, maybe look up to are telling them this is something you should do. For a lot of people, they don't even think about it, or they were so. But I think really the biggest part and the reason why your article meant something to me, it's we're just living in fear. There's just fear, it abounds, and people think that this vaccine is like some magic, that's going to protect them. When, like, have you ever tried a prayer maybe, or perhaps taking better care of yourself? Or there are other ways that you can combat sickness besides just putting a shot in someone's arm.
Yeah, and I've felt that I have taken a page out of the Winston Churchill book. I was, with the mask mandates, vaccine, all this stuff. I'm like, I'm not doing this. I'm not playing this game. And I felt like I was Winston Churchill standing on top of one of the buildings as the Germans are flying, bombing the city of London. No, but it is one of those things where it requires courage to sort of face down um, the politics of the situation. And I think that is what we're dealing with. And you pointed it out. This is a lot of political posturing towards like you've made a mistake in your assessments. Your assessments were based on what somebody else was telling you to
Mhm.
say. Now you've made a mistake, but you won't own up to it because technically it's not your mistake. It was just what you were told. It's the whole I'm just following orders type of situation. What we're dealing with is not military readiness. This is political readiness.
Mhm.
And how do you what's what's happening on the ground with everybody sort of around you? I mean, is it just everybody's just on board and we'll get through this?
I so where I work, I know our local leadership is not on board with this. I mean, the community that our Navy base sits in, I mean, it's a fairly small one. Now we're about 50 miles from Washington, D.C., so you can rest assured that there is heavy influence, from the DC end, but it is still a fairly, not real. I don't want to say rural, but there is a difference when you get away from DC versus being in that proverbial swamp. Because I'll tell you, like the minute you go into DC, it's just to me, I already feel compromised. Whenever I up there, it's a bizarre kind of feeling, um to be that way because people act differently, they behave differently. Our leadership, um well, a lot of them, because they have to say, well, I'm vaccinated but I support your decision. I don't really care whether you're vaccinated or not. I don't know why people have to say that, right? Why do you have to justify it doesn't matter. What we should be concerned with is this is not the way you lead a military. This is not the way you lead a country. This you don't put these types of mandates on people, and then when they don't do what you want them to do, okay, now they're the enemy, right? This and that's what they're going to do. But from where we are, they're waiting for numbers. They're waiting to see how many people. So that's part of what the religious exemptions were for, right? Well, I can start counting now how many people I'm really going to have to deal with. Some managers, not good ones, have referred to it as, well, it's just going to be like attrition, the normal attrition that you would have in any given year. Uh, we're not attrition, that we're not attrition type numbers. That would be talking about very small 1-2%, right? We're talking probably 10 or more percent. And that's just what's known. That's not including the people who chose to do nothing as of yet. So, um, what they're going to end up doing at the end of the day, I don't know, because I know I've talked to, as high as I can go where my Navy base is, and they've said they're really at the behest of what NAVC does, and that's Galenis. So, depending on what they decide to do with these religious exemptions, which none of us know. And by the way, we don't ask for them. We're telling them, we're not asking. It's like we have to have permission to have a religious viewpoint that should never have entered into our workplace at all, in period. But yet here we are, or medical exemptions for that matter. But um they didn't require this for my employment or anyone's employment prior to this. Not flu shots. They didn't ask whether we had tuberculosis. There weren't tests being done for this, and tuberculosis is very contagious. Why aren't we testing for that? Why aren't we testing for many other things? Nope, just COVID. And it's just politics.
Yeah, that's the scary thing. I remember for just a very long time, when I say very long time, it's very relative. But we were hoping, politics wouldn't get into the military. Over the past number of years, that was the thing. It's like, okay, it's gotten into Hollywood, yeah, okay, whatever. It's gotten into the media. It's gotten into sports now. The sacred, sports, like, okay, politics don't, it's not going to be in sports. Well, it's in sports. They're like, okay, well, we've still got the military, and now it's all in the military. And I want to talk about the constitutionality of the situation. Some somewhat good news came out of Texas. That's the originator of good news. This is according to military.com. It says the U.S. District Court Judge Reed O'Connor with the Northern District of Texas in Fort Worth ruled this past Monday that the DoD has violated the sailors' constitutional right to refuse the vaccine based on their religious beliefs. Reed stated that, quote unquote, or quote, there is no military exclusion from our Constitution, end quote. You have been talking about the constitutionality of this situation. What has been the response by just your fellow coworkers on, hey, this is against our constitutional rights. This is wrong from a religious perspective, being secure in your person, just a number of things. What has been the response?
So you might not find this very surprising. There are those people who are, because they agree with it, they don't see any problem with it. And then, of course, there are the ones who don't agree with it and see, exactly what it is. I have one person who works on my team. He's fully vaccinated. He's a former Navy chief. And, he's used to just getting shots in his arms. If his doctor tells him to do it, he's really not going to question it. But he sees that this is the issue for what it is. And when we talk, it's always, well, what will be the next thing? But others who have been, and it's always, if they're vaccinated, they don't look at it the same way because they're not the target of a problem. It's not a problem on them. They're not going to have any kind of, that adverse anything because of for employment or shopping or dining or whatever, travel. So they don't really look at it very much. But I think the bigger thing in that is they don't even understand their constitution in the first place. They don't know it. So if you don't know it, how on earth can you possibly know it that your rights are being violated to then defend them when they are? How could you possibly know that? Because you don't know the Constitution. So there you are. But I mean, obviously the unvaccinated ones, if they didn't know it, they certainly do now. But it really, sadly kind of boils down to, well, what do you really know about how your country runs, how it was set up, what our founding fathers actually did, what they really meant by the very simple words that they put into the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Those to me are sacred. And when we signed up for federal service, we swore an oath to uphold and defend that Constitution. And yet, where are we?
Yeah, I think that's the whole oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. For a lot of, I'll just say, military members, I think they view that as, well, let's just make sure nobody invades on our shores. And like, but that's not the Constitution. The Constitution is what is already within those borders. And I find it very interesting that there's already so much proof and evidence, and it's just obvious now, from talking heads on the mainstream media to the medical community, from Fauci on down, they're saying, people are getting the virus regardless if they have the vaccine. They're able to spread it. And yet they're continuing to push for people to get the vaccine under the pretense that it'll protect you from that which you will get anyways. I don't get it. But we've already shown, it's already evident that people who have the vaccine are getting the virus. And so it sort of knocks out of the water like, well, this is to protect you and me from you. So you need to get it. Like, it throws it on its head. So from a logical perspective, you can say, can you see what's going on here? And then from a constitutional perspective, like, can you see the long term effects? And I think we've got a lot of people. I've run into them as well. I even threw out a Book of Revelation thing to a friend of mine. I said, "Don't you think all this sort of lines up with what you'd see in the Book of Revelation?" And she's a Christian, you know. And her response, and she got the vaccine, and her response was this: "Oh well." And I was like, "You may want to revisit the Book of Revelation." But all joking aside, do you try to, or how do you try to convince somebody that the long term must outweigh the short term? How do you convince somebody of that?
That's a good one because that I think is really tough in our society now, and I think the younger the person is, the harder that's going to be. So I am not a youngin. So I think back to when I was, in my early 20s, or late teens for that matter. I had this need for independence. I needed to get away from my family. I needed to be out on my own. I needed to do my own, I need to do stuff for myself. I think we're seeing less and less of that in some instances, but that's also in my generation too. I think there are those who, right, they want something given to them. They want everything to be easy. They don't want to have to solve problems. They don't want to have to think about anything. Um, but if it really boiled down to it, to convince somebody, I mean, you really have to be someone, I think, influential. Unfortunately, like me, I'm probably not gonna convince anyone, because they don't want to listen. They only want to hear what has already been programmed into them. You try to talk about the vaccine, they just dismiss it. Well, it didn't make me sick, but that doesn't mean it won't make someone else sick. And it doesn't mean that it won't make you sick later on down the line. You don't know. You have no idea if any vaccine you've ever had is the reason why you have an illness today that, you're not attributing to that, but maybe it is. Do you know for sure? Not even sure our doctors know for sure.
Mhm.
So you would have to completely change the narrative for the top down. But even if you did that, I think it would take you know I don't know, maybe a generation to get that through. um that's the sad part. It can turn really quick, but I think to get it back to maybe more of a rational thought process for people, it will take a lot longer. But the constant fear, pressing that fear button all the time, you see it every day. Omicron this and Omicron that, and before it was Delta, and I don't even care whatever the variant is that they come up with, but it just makes people so scared that they're all flocking to get tested and get more vaccines and wear more masks and double glove and whatever other nonsense.
Yeah.
I don't know that you can convince those people. I mean, if you think about back in the beginning, you remember when you had the arrows to point you down the aisles of the grocery store. Like, people would get really mad if you didn't go in the right direction. I'm like, seriously, that I'm a scientist. That makes zero sense. Why would you do that?
Right.
I knew immediately the mask thing was pointless. I'm like, if masks worked, we'd have been wearing them long ago. Why now? But the military still insists on those, wearing masks everywhere. Even so, you brought up something before about logic. Well, the CDC just came out and said, oh, well, we can go to 5 days for quarantine or whatever, and as long as you're not symptomatic, you can come back to work. Well, the Navy sent out an email and said, yeah, we know the CDC said that, but we're awaiting guidance from, big Navy as to what our policy will be. That doesn't make any sense. Either the CDC is who you listen to, and I don't listen to them, but if you're going to, why wouldn't you listen to what they're saying? You'll pick some things, but not other things. And it's really just, I mean, if you look at it biblically, isn't it just people surrounding themselves with what they want to hear?
Yeah, yeah, itching ears, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, you know, what do you think is what do you think is the well? Let me put it in context. Probably last question, but what do you think is the end result? We've been in this since March of 2020. Is it 2020? Yeah, yeah, 2020. I'm like, man, time has flown by because I thought this was 2021. It is not. So we've been in this since March 2020. Boy, I mean, you telling me that it just things are just someone says something one day, somebody says something, opposite, and then you reverse course. It's been a constant reverse course, and yet as the lines in the grocery store, people are still following those lines wherever they lead. What do you think is the end result of all of this? And I will reference what is going on in Virginia right now. I don't want to be on a political spectrum, but you guys put in a Republican governor because people are fed up. They were fed up, one, with critical race theory in schools. Apparently, that was a huge turning point for Virginia. People seem to be waking up in pockets or maybe in mass. I don't know. What do you think is the end result of all of this, good, bad, or otherwise?
I mean, ultimately, I have to believe it's for the greater good. Because I don't think, you know, my beliefs. I believe that this is all happening because truly as a country, we've turned our back on God. And I really think that, when we stop, our founding fathers relied on God. They were very vocal about that. So, if our great nation was founded on that, and we've decided that we as men are wiser and we can do this without, his guidance, well, look at what you get, and you see it all around you. So, I do think people are going to see this. I do think they will wake up to it. My hope is that they turn back to, something that they need more than the government, which is God. But that's, and I also think people are seeing that it's neither Republican or Democrat. I mean, right now we think we're divided based on, ooh, those Republicans, ooh, those Democrats. But I see both sides of that making the same decisions with regard to this. The Republicans do, just as, I mean, they have their own stuff that they do, right? I mean, I am conservative, but I'm not always happy with the choices they make. They make just as bad of I mean, if you look at the whole government, we have way too much of it. And I don't mean the size, I'm just talking about the number of institutions that we have in the government. That's not limited government, that's expansive government. You don't need everybody, poking at you, telling you what to do, the CDC being among them. So I see people looking at this as, well, wait a minute, maybe we need to start looking at this. Parents finally saw what was going on in schools, and maybe this turns around our education. But I think it will be slow. I don't think it's like all of a sudden everyone's going to be like, oh, hey, we need to do something about this. I think it will be gradual, over some amount of time. But I see hope in the end, because it would be pretty bleak otherwise. But it is in God's control. So,
Well, yeah, from your mouth to God's ears, it's in His hands, and hopefully people are waking up en masse. Hopefully we turn this ship around, to use a Navy term. You're welcome very much. But yeah, Jennifer, thanks so much for joining me on the Sons of History. And thank you for, it's gutsy to say, you know what, no, I'm not doing this. I may be alone. I may be the only one doing this, but I will be doing this. And the thing is there are stories written about people like you, the people who are the few that stand up and say, okay, no, you can only go so far, and that's sort of the cost of tyranny. You know, it's you are tyrannized because typically the masses allow it to go on for so long, and then a few are left standing saying no, and then people write about those people. And it's the people who are like, yeah, I don't know, I'm path of least resistance. And then they're the ones reading the books and saying, man, I wish I could have been that person. So, but hey, Jennifer, thank you again. Keep in contact and greatly appreciate you being on the show.
Hey, you inspired me. That's why I wanted to share, what I had done. There are people out there who have courage. We're just, we're not big names. So we do what we can.
Well, you're doing great. Thank you very much. And glad I could be an inspiration as well. So,
Thank you. Have a good one.
well, I trust that you enjoyed the interview. Thank you again, Jennifer, for being on. It's just really alarming what has happened. Not what is happening, but what has happened in this country on every level, and how so many people seemingly are fine with it and are not looking to the future in the long term and saying, well, what happens when they come for this right, this right, this right, and this right? Will we just lay down, let sleeping dogs lie, if you will? What will we do as American citizens on the left, the right, and the center? What will we do? How far will we be pushed? Will we be pushed to the cliff's edge, or will we be pushed off of the cliff? And I'm afraid for some people, we're at the edge, or some people are tumbling and they don't know how to regain their footing. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've made some poor decisions and you think that hey, I didn't stand up for my rights, then I encourage you to start now. And if you have been standing up for your rights as an American citizen, just even as just a human being, if you're watching this outside of America, well, ladies and gentlemen, stay strong, stay the course, and don't stop fighting for what is right. I'm Dustin Bass with the Sons of History, and I'll talk to you later.